Welcome to Digging Deep. I'm Mark Sutcliffe, and I'm very excited to present the latest episode of my relaunched podcast, which is focused on my new role as mayor of Ottawa and connecting with interesting, fascinating people who have an impact on our city. And our guest today is Ontario M.P.P. and Cabinet Minister Caroline Mulroney. Caroline Mulroney grew up in Ottawa. She was born in Montreal, but she grew up in Ottawa because her father was the Prime Minister of Canada. She studied at both Harvard and New York University, and before going into politics, she had a very successful career in the private sector, in both business and law. And she also co-founded and led a charity for homeless and at-risk women. Caroline Mulroney was elected to provincial parliament in 2018, and then she was re-elected in 2022. At the time we recorded this interview, she was the Minister of Transportation for Ontario. That's obviously a really important role. She's now in a different, equally important role in Cabinet as President of the Treasury Board, and she continues to serve, as she did before, as the Minister responsible for Francophone affairs, for La Francophonie. This is a very fun and interesting conversation. We talk about her childhood growing up in Ottawa, how Ottawa has changed in her lifetime, what it was like being the daughter of the Prime Minister of Canada, her transition into politics, the important role of transportation in our city, her charity work, her thoughts on leadership, and much, much more. This interview was recorded live at the Mayor's Breakfast, a monthly event that I host at City Hall that is co-presented by the Ottawa Board of Trade and the Ottawa Business Journal. It's a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Let's start digging deep with Caroline Mulroney. Welcome home, because you spent a big chunk of your life here from age 10 to 19, is that right, just roughly?
Yeah, well, thank you, yes. It's great to be back. It's always great to be back in Ottawa. We moved here, I was here from 9 to 19, so 10 years.
And in fact, I was going to ask you, your 9th birthday was a very special day for your family. I'm not sure how much you got to celebrate your birthday and open presents, but it was a big day for your dad, right?
I did, yes. And maybe some of you here today were there at the Ottawa Civic Centre on June 11th, 1983. I think the air conditioning was broken that day. And
at the Civic Centre?
At the Civic Centre. And delegates, conservative delegates packed the place. And from what I heard, because I was home in Montreal, it really contributed to the energy and excitement of the day. And I was home with my friend who was older and babysitting, and we watched the results on television. And I was turning 9 that day, and my father wished me happy birthday on television, which was just about the biggest thing that I thought could ever happen to anyone, ever. And then my dad said, "And you're coming to Ottawa to meet me and Mom with the boys tomorrow." And I said, "That's very exciting." I did not realize we were not returning to Montreal. I was kind of brought here under false pretenses, actually no pretenses, but I was just told you're coming, and that was it. So we moved when I was 9 and my dad resigned in 1993.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. So 40 years ago this month,
That's right.
Your father was elected the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
That's right.
Yeah, amazing.
We share that anniversary, and my brother Nicholas was, my dad was elected Prime Minister September 4th, 1984, and Nicholas was born a year to the date after that.
Okay.
Yeah, so we share our birthdays with my dad's big anniversaries.
Right, amazing. So what do you remember about growing up in Ottawa? Because that's obviously a big chunk of your life, 9 to 19. Those are pretty important years.
I mean, I remember so much, obviously. It's funny coming back to Ottawa because it's not at all as I remembered. I mean, it was a long time ago, obviously. But to me, Ottawa, our life really revolved around, for me, my school and my friends, but our life revolved around the Hill and the people who worked with my parents, and our life at Stornoway or then at 24 or Harrington Lake. And so it really, to me, was a government town. And the non-government part of Ottawa was the market. And now when I come back, I see so much more. My best friend lived in Manotick, and it was like going out to the boonies, whereas now it's, growing and thriving. And so it's just changed so much. But for me, it really was, I remember a lot of the people that worked with my parents. And all these people who came to Ottawa, mostly the ones I knew were in the PC party, but who came here from all over the country because they believed in the party or they believed in an ideal, and they moved here and worked with such enthusiasm and energy and passion, and it was just a great place to grow up with all these amazing people. Probably why I ended up in politics, because I was so inspired by a lot of the people that I met. But to me, Ottawa was beautiful. I remember, because I was at Stornoway, which, as you know, the Dutch family was there during Danish family was there, Dutch obviously. Dutch family was there during World War II, and so the tulips all sprang. I remember being able to skate on the Rideau Canal, which obviously is not the reality for many people today. But yeah, I remember it was a beautiful place to grow up. I went to French school, so it was a very bilingual experience for me living here. And I remember just happy days at our home.
That's great. Did you think one day you'd go into politics? Was that on your mind, or was that a later decision?
It's very strange, but it was absolutely on my mind. I don't know how many 15-year-olds are convinced they're going into politics, but it was absolutely on my mind. As I said, I met all these great people doing all these, which I thought were amazing things, from people who were advancing my parents, so I spent a lot of time with them, to people who were policy advisors or on the comm side, the press side, to MPs, and I got to know their kids and their families. So I met kind of a broad spectrum of people who come to Ottawa, and I just loved it. And I also, admired my parents very much, and still do. And so it's not the family business, but if you sit around the breakfast table and the dinner table talking about medicine or engineering or construction or something, that's kind of what you know. And so for me and my brothers, it was politics. And so it didn't seem like a crazy thing to do. Now, when I decided to do it, my mom said, "You are crazy like your father." But so I always thought about, so when I was young, that's what I wanted to do. But then, as many of you know, you grow up and life kind of sets you on a different path, and so I thought about, I wanted to do it when I was young, and then, in my 20s and my mid-20s and early 30s, didn't really think about it that much. It wasn't until later, I think after my kids were born and settled, and I felt myself on a different path, because once you start working and you're trying to balance family and life and all that, you realize the challenge for anybody, and then throwing politics into it, I know having lived it, I know it's not that easy to balance. So, but I always knew it, and it was because of my experience in Ottawa and the great people that I met here.
So there were obviously, advantages to growing up in a family where you're surrounded by politics, and you learn a lot, I'm sure, just by observation. But is it challenging to enter politics with the same last name as someone who was the Prime Minister of Canada, and and in that environment to build your own identity and brand?
The benefits of being my father's daughter exceed any negatives, that's for sure. And he is, to this day, the greatest political advisor anyone could have, and I'm lucky that I get to call him as often as I do. And he lives vicariously through me now, so he'll probably call me and find out how this talk went.
Say hi for us.
I will. When I started, there are a lot of people who, when I ran for the leadership, I met so many people who knew my parents very, very well. One of the benefits of that was traveling across Ontario and meeting people who got involved in either the 76 leadership or the 83 or 84, all the different campaigns. And it was so wonderful. But then there's a whole other generation of people who don't know him at all. And to them, I'm Ben Mulroney's sister, which...
Who's that? I don't know.
Which was an adjustment, but
now he's Caroline Mulroney's brother.
That's right. That's right. Actually, so my first campaign in 2018, it was a early June election, and during the May 24 weekend, there was a royal wedding. Meghan and Harry got married. And as a monarchist, my daughters and I, we got up, we ate scones, we watched the wedding. It was very exciting. But then as a candidate, I, after that, put my running shoes on and my t-shirt and went door knocking. And so it was a beautiful day. And I was with Peter Van Loan, and I'm sure many of you here know Peter, and he's an expert on retail politics. And he had said, we were driving along in a rural area in my riding, and there was a corner lot, which Sean Webster knows this by now. Corner lots are golden because you can get 2 signs. And so Peter said, you've got to go there and get yourself 2 signs. So I walked down the driveway, and I assumed the owner was getting into his pickup truck. And so I knocked on the window before he drove away. And he rolled down the window, and I handed him my literature, and I said, good morning, sir, my name's Caroline Mulroney, and I'm running to be your next M.P.P. Can I count on your support? And he looked at my lit, and he said, is this Caroline Mulroney as in Brian Mulroney? And I said, yes, it is. He said, you absolutely cannot count on my support. There's no way I'd vote for Brian's daughter. And I said, oh, okay, well, thank you for your honesty, but if you don't vote for me, then Kathleen Wynne is going to be premier again, and is that really what you want? And he goes, oh, jeez, I don't know what to do. You better go talk to the boss. So I go knock at the door, and his wife answers the door, and I hand her my literature, and I said, good morning, ma'am, my name is Caroline Mulroney, and I'm running to be your next M.P.P. Can I count on your support? And she looks at it and she says, are you Caroline Mulroney as in Brian Mulroney? And I said, oh no, yes I am. And she said, as in the little boy who carried Meghan Markle's train in the wedding this morning? And I said, yes. And I said, can I count on your support? Absolutely. I said, can I have a lawn sign? He said, you can have 2. So I came away victorious. And so you never know where the name recognition will go. But it is important, obviously, to stand on your own 2 feet. And in my case, there's so many people who have such great affection and admiration for my father, and it's wonderful when they put that on you, but it's also very high expectations to live up to, especially when it comes to public speaking. But I think in politics, just like as in anything, it takes time. And so you can run on name recognition, and that's very helpful to get you there, but in terms of making yourself known, you really just need time to work with people, get to know them, bring forward policies, try to convince people that they're the right ones. And so, now that I've been in politics for a few years, I've been able to make my own path. But it's always a great benefit to have my dad's name, but also his support and his advice, because he's been able to help me on my path.
Yeah, I can only imagine some of the phone conversations you must have, because he would be right into, he loves this stuff, right? So he would be right into walking through everything with you, right?
Yes, and well, when I said I was running provincially, he was a little surprised, because I think he always thought, especially given my experience in Ottawa and his interest, that it would be federal. But, and he said, I don't know much about Ontario politics. For me, all I needed to know was Bill Davis. And now, although he lives in Montreal, he watches CP24 daily. He watches the Premier's press conferences even when I'm not in them. And he's become an expert in Ontario provincial politics. So it's been great, and it's been great to be able to kind of share this with my dad. But he also gives advice to others, and I know many of you in this room know him and probably have had the chance to talk to him. He's a tremendous advisor and counselor, and he never rushes to judgment. He always puts himself in someone else's shoes. So when you're struggling through something or working through something, he has the ability to think in a very holistic way about what it is, and his advice has always just been tremendous for me.
Now, 24 Sussex Drive, you mentioned. You lived there for 8 or 9 years, and nobody lives there now, except maybe a few small critters.
Some rats.
Yeah. Any thoughts on, given that you're one of the few people in Canada who lived at that house, any thoughts on what we should do about that?
Well, first I'll say, my perspective on Ottawa, as I said, is of a young person, and so it wasn't a homeowner. Now I would probably go in and say all the things that everybody saw at the time, like my mother. You know, and I remember the air conditioning never worked, and there were problems. I remember complaints about the roof. The night Meech Lake failed, there was, the air conditioning broke. And it was dark, and we had to have all the windows open, and there wasn't the air conditioning. It was everything. The power went out, so all the windows were open. We were trying to fan ourselves. We had candles going, and it was the most eerie thing you could ever imagine for a big political moment in Canadian history. And I remember 24 failing that night because people were coming over to work, and it wasn't possible. But to me, it was a beautiful house with, 50-something rooms and a pool, these beautiful grounds, great views. It was a beautiful, beautiful place. I can appreciate now the challenges of hosting big events for world leaders there, of trying to work there if you're a staffer. So there was kind of, it was a butler's room in the basement where all the staff would set up. And it just wasn't convenient for them or for the people working in the house. But I know that a lot of great relationships were built there. My dad and my mom were great hosts, and either it was people in Ottawa or people at the party level, but even more importantly at the international level, people who would come and spend time at 24 over private dinners. Great relationships were built that I know benefited Canada. And so I think that there's great value in having a home where our head of government can host other leaders, provincial, federal, and international leaders, to build relationships, because so much of politics is built on that. I'm sure you've felt that in your career, and I felt that in mine. And it's very hard when you're, especially at that level, if you're leading a nation, to have an hour to yourself where you can sit quietly in a intimate setting and get to know someone one-on-one. But it's those interactions, the interactions my father had with Ronald Reagan or George Bush or Boris Yeltsin. There were a lot of people who came through 24 Sussex that sat in what was called the Freedom Room on the second floor. And they got to know each other well, and my father was able to build upon those moments to move forward policies that were very important to Canada. And so I think there's tremendous value in having that. And I also think that given the level of activity that happens for a prime minister and a prime minister's office, I think that it would benefit the whole team to have an office space there. I mean, the life of a prime minister is unique, and so I think that there's nothing wrong with having a unique kind of work home experience or residence for them. So I think I'm probably in the minority. I think the thing should be torn down. I don't think that the building as it stands is worthwhile. I don't think a pool is necessary. You might need more office space, but I think that there's tremendous benefit to having it.
I agree, actually. I think, and I always thought, it doesn't belong to the Prime Minister. It belongs to the people of Canada, and it's an asset that we own that we should have been investing in and fixing, not letting it fall into a state of disrepair. So, notwithstanding the fact that your father gives you great advice and you had this experience growing up being in a political family, politics is very different today in many ways than it was during your childhood. What are some of your observations about that? Because your dad didn't have to deal with social media, and I'm sure there were there was a lot of partisanship, but I'm not sure there was as much polarization then as there is now.
It's hard for me to judge because I was, when you're the child of a politician, if you're interested in politics, you pay a lot of attention to it, so you're very protective. So I did feel the kind of polarization, but I do think social media has obviously exacerbated it. I remember from a media perspective, the faxes that would come in. Every morning, faxes from the newspapers across the country would come in, and Dad would get these stacks. And you couldn't touch them because he needed to read through them all, and that's how he kept informed on what was going on in the country. Now it's social media. When I announced that I was running for the nomination in my riding, I got a text from Ronna Ambrose saying, good luck, very excited for you. If you ever need any advice, let me know, I'm here. And I said, well, I think I need advice because I'm doing it. And she said, get off Twitter. That was her first piece of advice. And at the time, I just used Twitter as a news source. And it quickly filled up with negativity. And I was grateful to her for that advice, to get it so early on. I know that a good social media presence is one that is truly authentic and people get to know you, but I don't know the benefit. I think the risk reward for me is probably best to just not read comments, and I have my own private channels where I can connect with my friends and so on. But I don't go on social media. I think it's so negative, and it would kind of probably hold me back from doing what I really love about this job. And so I agree that it's very negative, especially for women. And we've seen some horrible things and critiques and things that have happened to politicians as a result. I mean, this is it's a great job. It's public service. People who put themselves out there. And I was saying, I think to Sean, I had you get these keyboard warriors who come after you, and they're either single issue or they just don't like you or something. And occasionally when I had more time, what I would do is I'd track them down in my riding, and I'd go to their door and give them the opportunity to talk to me about whatever it was that was bothering them. 9 times out of 10, they're so nice when you meet them, and they don't have it in them to say to you, your face, what they said online. And it's sad, but at the same time, I think you just can't go there. I think the thing, when you get into politics, social media is now part of our reality. You just have to remember why you got into it and realize that that's just noise that you shouldn't pay attention to.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's very brave of you to go and do that, and very smart too. But I think it's, social media is not a human experience. It doesn't have the human dynamic. It's very easy for people. There's a reason why there's road rage and there isn't sidewalk rage as much, because when you're in your car, just as when you're at your keyboard, it's very easy to demonize the person in the other car or on the other side of the social media conversation. It's very easy to they're not human, right? They're just a bunch of characters on a screen. But when you meet somebody in person, it's a different experience. So good for you for doing that. Are there women that inspired you, and do you try? We always talk about the need to have more women in leadership roles, and you are a woman in a very prominent leadership role. Is there advice that you give to younger women, to other women in leadership?
Well, the woman who I look up to the most is my mom, and to me, she's a woman in politics, even though she didn't ask to be. I think I learned so much from her, especially as a parent in politics. Raising kids when you're in politics is just different than a regular job, so I learned a lot from her. I learn a lot from the women that I work with. And it's getting to know people personally and understanding their challenges and how they overcome them and how they rise and how they balance all those things. So for me, it's the women that I work with in our caucus, and not even just the Conservatives, the people I've gotten to know in the legislature or at the federal level. So I draw a lot of inspiration from them, because we really get to talk about the realities of our lives. And I learn about what inspired them to get into politics and what it takes to get a woman to see herself in that role. In terms of getting women into politics, I don't think it's just about being out front and being a politician. I think that there's so many other roles in politics that are important and should be. We want to see more women in those roles, whether it's as campaign managers, policy advisors, anything. And so trying to get more women to volunteer for campaigns, to me, is kind of the thing that I do the most, is try to push young women to go out and volunteer for a campaign. It doesn't have to be PC Party of Ontario, it can be municipal, it can be federal, it can be whatever they're interested in. And when I ran for the leadership, there was a very dapper gentleman who'd worked for my father, and he said, I want to help you on your campaign. I said, that's great, I need some door knocking help this weekend. And he said, no, I will write policy for you. I said, well, I'm a provincial candidate, and the policy is all kind of the parties organize it, and I'm running on a platform. But what I really need is someone to show up and knock on doors. And he wasn't interested in doing that. But the people who volunteered for me, a lot of them, young women and men, ended up working either in my office or other people's offices. You get to know people on campaigns, you build relationships, and then that allows them to take the next step and get a job at Queen's Park or on the Hill or in Ottawa City Council or so on. And it's just taking that first step. And I think that although it could seem a little intimidating to go door knocking, it's actually not. It's a very easy thing to do. And it opens the door, I think, to a whole other world for people. And I think it's a great step. And I encourage, if you've got kids who are teenagers, to get them out door knocking. It's been great for my kids. And I think that it also, it's great for giving them confidence. You never know when you knock on a door what you're going to get. You could get a supporter, you could get someone who doesn't like you, but it teaches you to respond and pivot, and it's great from a communications perspective, building that up. But I think it helps for people who are interested or thinking about politics. It helps you overcome some of the most basic fears about it.
So I wanted to ask you about you have a whole bunch of jobs. You're an M.P.P. You're the Minister of Transportation. We'll talk about that in a moment. But your role as the Minister of Francophone Affairs for the province of Ontario, I know that's an important role for you. And you grew up in a bilingual household, and you studied in French. Tell me about that role and what you hope to accomplish, because there are a lot of Francophones in our audience here today, great leaders in the Francophone community in our city. We have a very vibrant Francophone community, a great French culture in our city. So this is obviously one of the places where the French language thrives and where the Francophone culture is most prominent in Ontario.
Yes, it's so I've been Minister of Francophone Affairs since 2018, and although transportation has a budget of about $7 billion and MFA has a budget of about $7 million, they're both equally important to me. And on some days, MFA can explode and it'll take over, everything. And so I spend as much time, I think, in Ottawa on MFA issues as I do on transportation issues, because it's such an important Francophone center. But I've been so lucky to have this portfolio. We've managed, I think, in the last 5 years to, and you mentioned this in the introduction, to look at the Francophone community in Ontario, not just as a historical and cultural community that we treasure and support, but as one that we really need to appreciate and harness. And we're here for the Board of Trade, and you're talking about all the things that you're doing, all the great initiatives to harness the the initiative of the business leaders in this community so that Ottawa can continue to grow and prosper. That's how we feel about the Francophone community from an economic perspective. There's so many Francophones across the province. Obviously here, a huge group, le regroupement des gens d'affaires de la capitale nationale, and such a strong motor and engine here. But across the province, in small rural communities, you've got small chambers of commerce. And so what we've done is we've brought them all together in a group called la Fédération des gens d'affaires francophones de l'Ontario, and try to invest in them to give them the opportunity to do just what the Board of Trade is doing here, and look at developing relationships amongst themselves, but also with Quebec, now with New Brunswick. We're working on an agreement with New Brunswick, and looking globally. In I think 30 years, there are going to be 700 million Francophones around the world, and a lot of our immigration comes from Africa, Francophone Africa, and there's great opportunity for us to look there for trade opportunities, just an opportunity to continue to grow. So instead of just subsidizing and funding our communities, we can invest in them so that they can then contribute to the overall prosperity of Ontario. So that has just been, for me, one of the most exciting parts of my job. And we have so many great partners in our post-secondary sector who are here today, making sure that there's a continuum of education. Like, I studied in French my whole life, until university. My father insisted that we all be educated in French, and that has been a gift to me. Obviously, it gives the opportunity to live and work in English and in French. But making sure that in Ontario you have the ability from la petite enfance, from school, from kindergarten to the post-secondary, to be able to live in French, and make sure that people know once you graduate, you can live in Ontario and work in French. We have 1.5 million people in Ontario who speak English and French, who are bilingual. That's 11% of our population. It's tremendous. And so we need to continue to focus on that and capitalize on that and invest in that. And so it's been a great opportunity to invest in something I care very much about.
Wonderful. It's vitally important. So let's talk about your other portfolio, transportation, and obviously a big part of that is transit. And you may have heard a little bit about some of what we've been through in Ottawa. But we have these big projects, and there are big projects going on in Toronto and in Hamilton and all over the province, big transit projects, and some of them have hit big stumbling blocks, and not like a lot of infrastructure projects all over the world. They end up over budget, they end up late. I still believe that in the long run, communities benefit from these projects, and they're game-changing projects in most cases. They transform cities. At the same time, of course, we're dealing with new realities post-COVID. Fewer people are going into the office, and we here in Ottawa, with the federal government as a major employer, that's been an issue for public transit in our city. So, what are your thoughts on where transit is going, public transit is going, and some of the challenges that we're facing?
Well, I absolutely agree with you. I think building transit is a game changer for communities, but I think it's, in a way, given the scope of the transit that we're building in Ontario today, I kind of think of it almost as a province-building exercise. We're connecting communities in ways that we should have started doing sooner, but we're connecting communities in ways that we need for the future. Building transit is an incredibly disruptive activity in our urban centers. It's tough for businesses, it's tough for residents, it's tough for commuters, but it has to be done. And what I've learned in the 4 years that I've been sitting in my role as Minister of Transportation is, although when you're living in Ottawa and you're going through the challenges of the Ottawa LRT, you think this, we're doing this, we're the worst, it's terrible, all this is terrible. When you're not in Toronto and you're dealing with the challenges of the Eglinton Crosstown, you think we're getting it all wrong, this is the worst. But if you go around the world, you see that every community that's building transit is facing very, very similar challenges, from technical issues, but mostly cost overruns and delays. It happens in Sydney, it happens in London, it happens in Toronto. So these are challenges that occur because it's such a massive task to try to do this. I was in London recently, and I toured the Elizabeth line. So the Crossrail project built a tunnel that I think is about 48 kilometers long under the city of London. And I thought, given all the challenges we had in the city of Toronto, and we took down 6 trees at the Law Society of Ontario, I thought I was going to learn more. I wanted to understand how they overcome their heritage issues in London. They actually, when they were tunneling in London, they hit 2 plague pits. They were pits from the 1300s. They're basically mass graves that had to halt construction, and they had to bring in experts to analyze this and clear it. I mean, so the challenges that we face in Canada are challenges that exist around the world, and some are even greater. Crossrail was a project that was 4 years late, and it connects 2 rail lines on the outside, on the outskirts of London. So it was 4 years late, but today, people don't talk about it being late. They're just thrilled that it's there. It's provided more connections to people to get around the city in a much easier way. And what they've also done is something that we're doing through the Ministry of Infrastructure, is they've built communities around the stations. So they're building they call it transit-oriented development. We call it transit-oriented communities, because our goal is to get people out of their cars, living in an easier way around transit, so that just to it improves your quality of life, and it makes transit more accessible to people. And so we're starting to do that, and that has been, when you talk about a game changer in London, that has been a tremendous game changer for them, for the city. And so yes, there are challenges when you're building. You know, construction can go along fine, and then when you're trying to get the system working, then you're trying to get all these pieces to work together, and that's a complicated task. It's complex. But once you get through that and the system opens and it's running, it's like childbirth. People forget about all the challenges they had before, and they say, let's build another transit system. That was so much fun the first time. But it's essential that we do it. And in Canada, as you know, in Ontario, we're welcoming 200,000 new people every single year. And you know, we need to build roads. I'm a big proponent of making sure that we have the highway infrastructure. We can't ignore that. But we need to have transit to get people around. And I think that's the way, it's the way my kids want to get around. They want to use transit. And so we need to make sure that that infrastructure is there for them.
Just a quick follow-up question. Given the post-COVID reality, you know, in Ottawa, our ridership is at maybe 67, 68% of pre-COVID levels, and I know it's the same in maybe a little bit higher in some communities, but mostly the same. How do we make it sustainable? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think we're still working through it. People have come back to transit in a big way, surprisingly. We just announced more service on our GO Rail network to Niagara because ridership was up 340% on weekends. So, you know, weekend ridership is skyrocketing, and depending on where you live, if you live in a university or a college town, your ridership is also going to be much higher than it's going to be in downtown Toronto, for instance, because so many companies are still working through, or they've made their decision about return to work, and 2 to 3 days is having an effect on the downtown core, and I know that's a big issue here in the city of Ottawa. So towns that have employers, huge employers that are making that kind of a shift, obviously the impact on transit is going to be big, but we don't know how long this will last. Maybe it is for the long term in some cases. But we believe ridership will come back just from the overall demographic growth that we are going to experience. So the need for transit is there. How people use it may be different, and that is going to require service adjustments. But given that the population is going to grow by 1 million people every 5 years, we need to build, and we need to keep putting on service.
Okay, we're almost out of time, but I'm going to ask you a music question. Nobody's going to understand why I'm setting it up that way. We have some great people from the music industry in our community, in our audience today, by the way, who I introduced you to. But is it true that Michael Bublé met David Foster at your wedding?
Yes, it is. So my dad and my mom, and as a result, I grew up with it, they're big fans of the standards. So Frank Sinatra, Bobby Darin, we all love dancing to that music. So we were looking for a wedding singer who would do that. And Colin McSweeney, who's here, his brother Michael knew Michael Bublé. I don't remember how he got to know him, but he did. And Michael Bublé had been a wedding singer in Vancouver. And he was actually getting out of the business. I think he was done with the wedding circuit. And we got his CD, and we thought he sounded great. And Michael said, no, you got to do this one last gig. So he came to Montreal and he performed at my wedding. And David Foster had been an old friend of my parents. He helped my mom. My mother was the honorary chair of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And as part of her fundraising work, she organized a concert once with Céline Dion and had David Foster produce it. So she also introduced David Foster to Céline Dion, who did not sing in English until he met her. So that's another connection my mom put together.
Look at all you've done for the music industry in Canada.
My parents did that. They did. Yeah. My mom, she did a great job for the Canadian music industry and for those two artists in particular. But so David was there, and he heard Michael. And the next day we had a brunch, and he sang at the brunch, and he invited him to his studio in Los Angeles, and the rest is history.
Amazing. Good for you. Well done. Last question. I wanted to talk about your volunteer work and the community work you've done in your life, particularly before you went into politics. And I know there's an Ottawa connection to that, actually. And you did a lot of volunteer work, I believe, with your sisters-in-law, your brother's wives. Can you just talk about that and what you learned from that experience and what you tried to achieve?
So my first charity work was for an organization in Ottawa called Bruce House, which was an AIDS hospice back in 1991, I think, or 1990. I think it had 13 beds. And I remember at the time being out at an event and people talking about AIDS and people who had HIV, and there was just kind of a misunderstanding even back then about how you got it and what it was like to live with it. So I wanted to raise awareness by supporting Bruce House, and we had an event at 24 Sussex, invited all the people who worked on the Hill of all political stripes, and we had volleyball, we had a band, and it was just a great event, and we raised about $13,000 for Bruce House at the time. And so that experience really stuck with me. I really enjoyed the hands-on experience of working, finding an organization that I cared about and supporting it in that way. And so years later, my sister-in-law Jessica, who's married to my brother Ben, had told me about an activity she participated in Montreal with her mother, which was putting together a shoebox filled with little luxuries that any woman would enjoy, but if you were going through a tough time, you wouldn't splurge on for yourself. And collecting those items, putting it in a shoebox, and delivering it to a women's shelter. And so she wanted to do that in Toronto. And so I said, well, I'd love to do that, because I just want to do something that was hands-on. You can get dressed up and go to charity events and write a check, but often you see people spend more on their dress than they do on the event. And it's all very, very important work to do that, but I really wanted hands-on. So we started this. We sent out an email. My other sisters-in-law joined us. And the response was overwhelming. We were looking for 156 shoeboxes. We got almost 400. So we had to rent a van, and my brother Ben was helping. And women's shelters often keep their addresses secret. They don't want to publicize their locations. So it was hard to track down. And you can imagine these ladies who are working at these shelters. Ben Mulroney shows up at their front door with his arms filled with shoeboxes. They didn't know what was in them. But because of the response we got, we thought, all right, we're going to do this again, but we need to be more organized. And we did get more organized, and here's the benefit of social media. Through social media, through Facebook, the charity drive that we started to help one shelter in Toronto went to 10 cities across Canada in 2 years, because women would hear about it in Manitoba or in Vancouver or Halifax and say that they wanted to do the same thing. And what I learned about it was how community-minded Canadians really are. They want to do hands-on things to help build their communities, to help people who are more vulnerable. And Shoebox has been built up in other areas in the US, the UK, and Australia. But our biggest success is in small towns across Canada, where people are really committed to helping those who need it in their community and giving back in a hands-on way. And our growth was organic and astronomical just because of the generosity of so many people across the country. So it was a great experience. I don't get to do it anymore. The Integrity Commissioner doesn't allow you to participate in charity events. But watching it grow has just been a source of great joy for me.
Amazing. Thank you for doing that. And we don't have any more time, but thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, and thank you for being a wonderful role model for young women and for, I believe, inspiring people to consider politics as a career. I think it's very important that good people go into politics and that women go into politics. And as you mentioned, it's not just necessarily being a candidate, but in all kinds of other roles. And I also want to say thank you to you and the Premier and the other members of Cabinet, because I've had a great experience working with your government as the new Mayor of Ottawa. It's been very collaborative and cooperative, and the Premier and you and your colleagues have been very, very responsive to the needs of Ottawa and very available when we've needed to talk, and we're extremely grateful for that. A big part of the job, obviously, is for a municipal government is going to the province and asking for help on various things, and you've been extremely helpful, so thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure working with you, and thank you to all of you for all that you do. And the Ottawa business community has been a great partner for our government as we're moving forward, not just with transportation, but our housing plan. And we want to be able to work well with you. And I think so far it's been a great relationship. And with you at the helm, I know we're gonna get all those homes built.
Absolutely. Caroline Mulroney.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is Caroline Mulroney, the Treasury Board President and Minister of Francophone Affairs for the province of Ontario. And that's it for this episode of Digging Deep. We have more episodes coming soon. And if you want to hear more about what's happening in the City of Ottawa, please subscribe to my newsletter at marksutcliffe.ca. It's very short, comes out every couple of weeks, little tidbits about what's going on in the city. I think you will find it interesting. You can subscribe at marksutcliffe.ca. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you for listening.